And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us, and one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it, and that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon Wright. Tonight is the first night that I get to use my new studio. There's that, so a little bit of celebration for this one. But back on topic, tonight we're going to be joined by my guest, Bartimaeus. We reached out a while back and talked a little bit about some of the things he wants to discuss tonight. He believes that he contacts angels, and he also is a practitioner of magic. I know that seems to be a little taboo here for some people, but definitely piques my interest, so I hope you guys would find it interesting too. But before we bring him on, if you've ever had an experience and you'd like to be on an episode of Tinfoil Tales, make sure to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com, or you can go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Either way works for me, so just make sure to reach out and we'll get something scheduled for a future episode. You want to help the podcast out, make sure to keep sharing it around. Word of mouth is the best way to help the podcast grow, so just share it wherever you listen to it at. Make sure to share. You can also leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to Tinfoil Tales at. That helps with the rankings, makes it more discoverable. It really does help. So it's just one couple clicks here and there, and you're good to go. Just know I appreciate you guys. Anyone out there helping, you want to help out too, you can become a member of the Patreon. There's the free tier and the paid tier. Make sure to go there and check that out. Get access to all the episodes early, all ad-free content. Also, make sure to find me on all the social medias. Look for Brandon Tinfoil Tales on Facebook, where I'm most active. But we're going to go ahead now and bring Bartimaeus on. Definitely looking forward to talking with him, and I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'd like to take this time to welcome my guest tonight, Bartimaeus. Thanks for coming on here and talking with me.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, not a problem. Would you like to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I've been an esoteric practitioner for just about 10 years or so now. I first got started studying this stuff when I was 12 or so, so that's like a whole 16 years. I've just been into all these sorts of things. I started studying grimoires and stuff when I was in middle school just for fun. Just try to plumb the secrets of the universe and learn about magic and all that sort of stuff. Currently, just in terms of my general spiritual practice, I'm a Christian Gnostic. I'm affiliated with the church up here on the West Coast. Personally, my own theological approach ends up leaning a little more towards the traditional Christian side of things, but I find a lot of value in Gnostic writ. So, let's see.
Now, the Gnostic part of that, what is for anyone listening, what separates that from the normal Christianity version of it? Because I know when someone says they're agnostic, they don't necessarily believe in they believe that there's the spirits, a spirit realm of God and everything else, but they don't necessarily believe the Bible. Is that correct?
So there's a difference between being agnostic and Gnostic. There's agnostic is the negative form of the word. It means not knowing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this sort of state of believing that you can't know, whereas the Gnostics have the exact opposite perspective, where the whole goal is this knowledge of the higher forces, that specifically the knowledge of God, to the degree that we can accomplish that while we are still alive. So a lot of the things that came up where Gnosticism ended up being condemned by the official church back in the day was partially because of certain schools of Gnostic thought that I actually think were pretty corrosive. these really dualistic forms of thought, that absolutely condemned the material world and said that it was irredeemable and completely evil. And and there were some others where they just had different ways of looking at things. But the general approach of Gnosticism is that instead of just faith itself being the thing that accomplishes your salvation, you have to actually know God and to have personal experience with God as he is, rather than just believing in something because it says in a book. In fact, actually, one of the interesting things that's kind of ignored in Gnostic history and is just not so well known, it's not really talked about in the pop Gnostic world, as I like to refer to it, is that Marcion, for example, who is known as a very much a dualist Gnostic heretic, who maintained that the Old Testament God was Satan and all of these sorts of things. He was actually one of the main sources we have for the letters of Paul. All of those epistles, Corinthians and Galatians and all that stuff. He basically collected all of that, and he's the one who preserved that for the future of the church, basically, which is really interesting that he doesn't get credit for this. The main part of the whole delineation between, say, somebody who'd be called Gnostic and who'd be part of the early traditional church, up until like the year 1000 or so, was really a lot of the time it was a matter of politics more than anything else. I can't remember off the top of my head who it was, but one of the first biblical commentaries we have was written by a known Gnostic teacher, which I think is a fascinating bit of history there. But yeah, generally speaking, there's also a lot more focus in like contemporary Gnosticism. There's a lot more focus on the internal aspects of the divine, where, like, for example, in St. Paul's epistles, there's a letter. One of his statements is that we are the temple of the Holy Spirit, right? And that there are other statements, like in the Gospel of John, where it says that Christ abides in us as we dwell in him, and all of these sorts of ideas. There's a lot more emphasis put on the side of knowing God as he is within us, and knowing Christ as he is a part of us, instead of just an abstract deity somewhere else. That there's a lot more focus on that side of things, rather than, for example, moral codes and dogmatic concepts.
I didn't want to derail or anything, like ask questions, get it off topic or whatever, but like that was just something I know that kind of like I've always wondered, like, what the difference is when someone says they're Gnostic, someone says they're a Christian or whatever, and I know I've heard people say they're agnostic or whatever, so I just want to try and get a little bit of clarification that way. I understand a little bit better, and anyone out there listening may understand a little bit better too, because there's so many different denominations of religion, especially like with Christianity. One of my recent episodes, they said there's over 40 something thousand versions of Christianity, which
It gets crazy.
I had no idea that was a thing, and I was like just really surprised and took back by it. So,
Oh yeah, post Reformation, with the whole Protestant Reformation, it's like the ideas that Martin Luther basically established ended up just really kind of running off the rails in a lot of ways. When you have this idea of, like, sola scriptura, that only scripture is important and only faith, well, there's a lot you can do with that. So, you have, like, here, particularly here in America, you have like a bunch of different evangelical denominations, and yeah, it gets crazy. Every other little church becomes its own independent denomination, as long as they have a pastor. They can be a denomination of their own. It's interesting.
It is strange to me that how that works, because I don't want to go too far into my own stuff, but like there was a church here in my area, and people that I know were like, it was their church and only their family went to it, and only like the one guy was the pastor, and then like it was like their own family church. Like all the kids went to their parents' church, and their grandkids went to, like, no outsiders went to. I was like, it's almost got like a cultish vibe to it, but
Interesting.
yeah, just whatever. I mean, whatever
Yeah.
works for people, I guess. So,
Yeah, after a certain point, that's pretty curious, though.
hmm,
I've heard of this as a thing in more remote parts of the country, but yeah, interesting.
yeah. But well, if you would like to dive into what you want to discuss tonight, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we can go wherever you want to go with it.
All right. Well, so considering we got started off with the whole the whole concern of Gnosticism, which has to do with this concept of the personal experience of the divine, I think it'll be quite relevant to discuss my general passion for angelic theurgy, which leads to the experience of communicating with angels, which is something that is a bit of a perennial topic in alt spiritual circles. I've seen like Dion Fortune books all about like, oh yeah, talk to your angel and all this stuff. Different new agey things that talk about that. It's like I also just recently gave a presentation on the Holy Guardian Angel. It was in Canada, but it was ended up being a remote thing. That was pretty fun. I'll actually be putting that up on my YouTube channel in a week or two, I think. Just got to process the video and all that stuff. But so in the Western magical tradition, which goes all the way back to ancient Greece and Egypt and all that, there's a general process through which that we humans are able to get in contact with the higher divine forces, which is often referred to as theurgy, which means literally just God work. And as time went on, after society got to be more monotheistic, or I wouldn't say monotheistic strictly speaking, but oriented towards a monotheistic or monist conception of things, whether through Neoplatonism or through the Christian perspective. This practice of theurgy, of getting in contact with the divine celestial powers, ended up transforming into this form of work of invoking angels. And so some of your audience may be familiar with Dr. John Dee, the famous English occultist and magician who was the astrologer for Queen Elizabeth I, and basically he also was a spy for her. He was the first spy. He was actually the original 007, funnily enough. He's a great example of somebody who had engaged in this particular art and received a system known as Enochian or Enochian, where he had communicated with these angelic beings. He said he saw a vision of the Archangel Michael through his crystal ball, and he gave him a magical ring that was then used to basically receive this entire magical system and a special angelic language that was used within the context of this magical system, which, if you look at the history of England and the British Empire after this whole series of events, he basically, through his work, established the British Empire. It's really quite a fascinating thing right there. But this issue of the work of invoking the angels, a lot of people fall into this sort of negative self-concept where it's like, oh, well, we can't know anything. I can't communicate with the divine forces. I can't know anything. I can't accomplish anything. All of these sorts of negative ideas. But we can engage in this practice of theurgy, which puts us in contact with these higher forces. And there's all sorts of interesting visions that come along with this as well, that, considering as I saw on your channel, there's a lot of focus on the sort of paranormal side of things.
Yeah. It's like a lot of weird stuff on my show.
Yeah. That's interesting stuff too, so there is this practice that we can engage in that can put us in contact with these higher forces that can help guide us and to help us accomplish our goals in this life. For example, if you look in the book, the 3 Books of Occult Philosophy by Agrippa, which is a famous occult work that has to do with the 3 areas of magic: the natural magic, which has to do with like the virtues of plants and stones and all these sorts of things, as well as astrological magic. And the 3rd book has to do with celestial magic and theurgy, like this whole process of getting into contact with the angels and trying to get closer to God through this process. There are 7 different, essentially 7 different angels that correspond to the planets, who have different ways that they can help us out. For example, let's say that you were to be having issues with your love life. You could evoke the archangel of Venus, whose name is Anael, who can, if you were to go through the procedure to invoke this angel, you could get help in those areas relating to Venus, like with love and luxury and beauty, appreciation of beauty and becoming more beautiful and all those concerns. So we'll use Anael kind of as an example here. So let's say you are single and you really don't like being single. You want to find somebody who's a good match for you, to find a good significant other. So what do you do in this particular paradigm where we're able to interact with angels and to gain these higher levels of knowledge and all these sorts of things? So there's a period of time in angelic work where you have to engage in purification, which is where you would just take a period of time to fast from things. Nowadays, water fasting I've seen has become incredibly popular, as well as just intermittent fasting on the whole, but particularly water fasting. You don't have to go that hardcore, at least for the initial couple days that you prepare. Morning of, you should ideally not eat until you perform the operation, but there's a period of time where you take time to hold back from eating meat and just reducing the amount of food that you eat for at least 3 days when you're about to perform this work. Not to drink alcohol or get high and do drugs and stuff. You're not supposed to do that stuff while you prepare for this great encounter with the direct manifestation of God's consciousness. And there's time leading up to this particular working where you have to engage in meditation and prayer, where you work on figuring out exactly what your goal is in terms of getting to know this angel. Like, why are you doing this? What's the reason? Then there's examinations of conscience where you go and figure out, how did I err? Whether it's in regards to your specific goal here or just in other things. In the old grimoire tradition, they have a lot of pre-written confessions that are meant to be said in the process, that are just meant to cause you to think about the ways in which you've messed up. We all screw up every once in a while. That's just a part of life. And so there's the purification and the prayers and meditation. And there's also just different ritual implements that should ideally be prepared during this period of time. You could use a table, a small form of a table. There are different diagrams of them called a table of practice, which is utilized for placing upon it a crystal or a chalice of wine or some other form of the device used for scrying or to perceive the visions through it. Black mirrors are another one that's often used. And in fact, John Dee had one of those as well. So you take this 3-day period of time where you devote yourself to doing this work. You prepare incense and candles and you do these prayers and purifications and all that stuff. And then comes the big day. If we were to be following this example here and invoking the Archangel of Venus, Sanael, that would be on Friday, which is the day traditionally associated with Venus, which works great for that being the last day of work, right? In your average work week. The Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, you get Friday as your party day, which is very much a Venusian thing, but I digress. So Friday morning you wake up, you engage in some private prayer, and then you prepare yourself to say this particular invocation of the angel, where you call forth to the angel in the name of God and light your incense and cleanse the area with holy water and all these other things. And what happens at the end of it is kind of the more interesting part of the whole process. There's the period of time leading up to it where you're working on kind of calming down and kind of turning away from the world, getting to a place where you can have these extra sensory perceptions, instead of being distracted like we are in our day-to-day life. And so comes the time that you're to call up the angel, and when you get to the point that you have success, there's visions and all sorts of interesting things, visions of lights around the scrying apparatus and different odors, not necessarily from the incense, but the angels are described in the traditional literature as having particular special odors that come with them. Sounds like the light ringing of high-pitched bells and all these other things. Then the angel's there and you get to communicate with it, and through that communication you can gain new levels of knowledge, both in terms of kind of the theosophical type of knowledge where you're trying to know God and all that stuff, and also just in terms of getting advice for how to handle your own life and how to make your life what you want it to be rather than it sucking. Relating to the process of angelic invocation, I would like to share a bit of an anecdote from my very first attempt at this art back in 2015, I think was the first time.
Okay.
Or late 2014. No, it was 2014. Yeah, it was the very end of 2014. It was the first time I had tried to invoke an archangel. in my little apartment in upstate New York. So kind of an odd situation there. It's kind of like a subletting sort of thing. I had set up a little closet to be my ritual space that I had cleaned out, and I set up the ritual table, and I had all this stuff set up to do this work. And I was working kind of a late shift thing at a taxi company where I was, and so I wasn't able to do the rite until very late at night. And I had come home. I just engaged in some prayer and meditation, kind of riling myself up for the work. And as part of it, I had used the first 3 of these Enochian calls, in that angelical tongue. I had been recommended to use them. It wasn't me personally recommended to use them. It was on a pretty well-known website, studioarcanist.com, where there was somebody who was recommending using these 3 calls to kind of like attenuate the space for this interaction for the angelic forces. And it's in this very odd sounding language. It's very much a synthetic language in every way. It's interesting. But so we have the moment, first time, I've got my ritual robes on, and I have all my stuff set up for doing it in this weird little closet. And when I had just got started on the prayers, calling on the angel to come and show up, there are these bangs in the back room of my little place. It was pretty well insulated. It wouldn't have been anything from the other people. It was like 2:00 in the morning. There was just these big thuds from within my own quarters, and it was kind of, I felt like the kind of like the hair along the back of my neck standing on end, and it was very interesting experience. And I started seeing the lights within it was basically a glass from one of these like wine glasses from Michael's or something, because my scrying mirror had fallen off a shelf and broke in the week of the purifications. And I saw these lights forming over the chalice, and I was just like, wow. I just kept on going on with it from what I'd been reading for a long time. I was like, oh yeah, well, you got to see like this humanoid shape show up. And then, if you don't get that, it failed. But I saw these lights, and I just, the whole thing just was like, it was frankly quite incredible. It encouraged me to do the work again later, but, suffice it to say, this is my first attempt, and it didn't go exactly the way that I thought it was supposed to. So I ended it, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just close the ritual the way that it needs to be done and go on to do something else. I'll come back to it later after I have a bit more practice, maybe. And a few months later, after I'd come back home to Washington State, I was reading a book that was discussing, it's called the Celestial Keys, I think is what it's called, by Dr. Thomas Red. It was put up by Stephen Skinner some years ago, who's a big author in Solomonic magic in particular. And the author of this book, this Dr. Rudd from the 17th century, who was a major angelic magician. Apparently there was some order of magicians practicing Enochian magic in that place and time. He discusses there all the ways to know when the angels arrive, and he says that there will appear a multicolored curtain over the crystal or over whatever the scrying device is. And I basically just like slapped myself like, oh, geez, it's like I was here. I was right at the beginning of the process, and I just fell for the stuff online that was like, if we don't see this precise form of manifestation, it didn't work, sort of thing. But reading that gave me a lot more encouragement, and I've just been practicing that form of the art ever since then. But generally speaking, I was
going to ask a couple questions.
Yeah, go for it.
When you communicate, or when you are attempting to communicate with these things, and if you're getting some sort of responses that you believe are like from that, how does one determine if they're actually angelic responses, or if you're not getting responses from something else pretending to be that way?
That is a great question. Thank you for asking that. Okay, so the general process is that you would ask it to swear in the name of God, because the essential underlying theory of all these things is that nothing can lie if it's swearing by God's name. That would be essentially a grave sin, a form of blasphemy, all that sort of stuff. And so they are forced to swear in that name. And there's also in the Gospels themselves, Jesus also says that, you test the spirits in my name is one of the things that he says. So if you're practicing in a Christian paradigm in particular, you could use the name of Jesus and ask them, are you truly the spirit X? And if they say yes, then you say, do you swear by the name of Jesus, by the five wounds and by his most sacred blood that you are truly the spirit X? And then spirit will answer honestly, because it has to. It's part of the rules of the game, basically. And there are other signs too. I mean, like, for example, the diabolical spirits tend to have a very, like, what's the word I want? Not particularly pleasant smell, like rotting meat and sulfur and these sorts of things. Like I've had this happen. Even when I have never had a demon randomly show up while invoking an angel. Just to make that clear too. John Dee writes in his diaries about some things happening, but he wasn't doing a very structured thing, to be fair. He was just saying a bunch of prayers and hoping to God something would show up, instead of it being the structured way of, I have this spirit I want to talk to, and therefore I'm going to call this spirit and hopefully it'll show up. Even when I have had incense, when I'm conjuring, when having to work with demons, or just in times where I've had to deal with them, they show up sometimes. They tend to bring with them a smell of rotten eggs or rotting meat. It's just completely inexplicable too.
That sulfury smell.
Odd. Yeah. There was one time I went to go hang out with somebody some years ago. It was kind of a formal meeting sort of thing. So hanging out is the wrong term. And I came home. It was sometime in the evening. And my wife was at home waiting for me. I came home and she was like, "Dear God, you smell like rotting meat." And I was like, "That's really weird." There was nothing that would have led to that odor around me. But the guy who I was speaking with had a lot of severe spiritual problems, we'll say. He was just, he had a lot of problems. Very, very, there's a way to have pride over things. There's the thing that's being prideful, where it's like just sheer arrogance. He was like convinced he was like a god among men, and composition and theological mystical understandings and stuff. And the guy was just a total nut. But anyway, but yeah, so she was like, "You smell like death and rotting meat." And I was like, "Okay, well, here we go." So I blessed some holy water and anointed myself with it, sprinkled the place that we were renting at that time, and the smell went away. That's one of those things that does happen sometimes. There's smells and other feelings, like demons will bring feelings of fear and anxiety. And angels, it says, do not fear in the Bible, and an angel shows up, but that it's a feeling of awe. It's like this profound awe and like sort of an existential excitement, I guess would be a way to put it, like an ecstatic state that you get to in interacting with celestial spirits. It's interesting.
I've had someone, and I've now interviewed them over this, but they've mentioned off air that sometimes they try and summon demons for financial purposes. I don't know how that works, and I don't know if that's a smart thing to be trying to do, but is that common that you're aware of? Like, people, they actually try and attempt to use demonic entities for their own benefits? I know there's a whole big conspiracy about cabals and all this other stuff, but like, just in general, like the average person, is this something that people actually attempt to do?
Oh yeah, all the time. It's like reason number one why people get involved with the occult is mostly to conjure demons, to get paid, get laid, or get even. That's kind of the big three, especially getting paid. And I haven't really seen that it does anything for anybody. There is a way to deal with the whole aspect of demonic forces, but it's just not, in my own personal experience, it's just never been something that plays out the way that people try to advertise it as. I've known people who personally made pacts with a demon known as Clownet from the Grimoire Verum, who is reported to give great wealth. But it's like, one of the guys who I knew who was involved in this particular compact had like severe kidney failure. His significant other has left him. He's like all alone at this point. There's nothing going on. The other guy, basically the same situation. He's very ill and just doesn't have any money, like nothing really going for him, which is actually kind of in good part discussed in my favorite Christian grimoire, The Arbitel of Magic, which I have a whole video series I'll be releasing in the cold months when it gets too hard to film out here. Where the author talks about this issue of people who have these ends they want to accomplish, and they feel like I have to go to the demons to do this. And they want to get rich. They feel like I need to go and talk to these particular demons from these grimoires, from the Goetia or Goetia or however, whichever form of pronunciation your viewers may be more familiar with, or the Lesser Key of Solomon and the Grimoire Verum and all these other grimoires where they have these spirits that are supposedly devoted to making you rich. And it's like they don't get anything for it. Instead they just get damaged. It's like, because there's a very fine line that has to be walked when dealing with these spirits. People think it's like, oh, if I give Belial some offerings, like I'm going to get everything that I want. It's like, no, that's not really how it ends up working. I've known people who even encouraged doing this sort of thing to me some years ago with some particular of those spirits, one of whom was made famous by a horror movie, whose name I'm not going to mention, but I can't remember the name of the movie either. Is that one where there's some family pact thing and then like everybody dies at the end or something? Like, oh, you should work with this spirit for wealth, and that same person now is like struggling to handle anything. I don't think that demonic workings are advisable for anybody, honestly. The only way that working with demons ends up working is if it's specifically to exercise their evil forces and to make them serve as slaves. Anything other than that ends up immediately turning into worship of demons, and which doesn't benefit anybody at all. It only helps out the demons, and they don't really care for our well-being. They mostly hate us. They either don't care about us or they hate us. It's kind of one of those sorts of relationships there.
I could go on for a long time and ask a whole bunch of things. So again, I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but we can go back to what
unfortunately.
What you want to talk about, but maybe we can do a follow-up, because there's a lot of stuff that I've kind of wanted to talk about when it comes to like the angelics and the demons and everything else and how people dive into it. I've never been able to find someone that's willing to talk about it. So,
oh, really? Wow.
I've had people lined up, but
they
never come through with the interviews. They always
seriously?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That sucks. Well, I'm honored to be the first one to come on to discuss the stuff. That's pretty cool.
Like I've had people that said they've had demonic attacks, and I've had other people that mention things like that, but I've never been able to talk to someone that openly communicates with like angelics, or someone that's openly communicated with demons or something like that. So it's something that I don't know if it's too taboo for people or they just don't want to talk about it.
There's a side of it where, privacy is one of those big things in this work. I mean, personally, I won't, there are some things that I can't talk about as kind of like an oath type of thing, where it's like, I can't discuss something, but there's also just kind of a general principle in occult practice in particular, and really just generally mysticism, the fourth rule of the Sphinx, as it's referred to, of silence, where it's like, some things are meant to be kept private. It's like a marital relationship, right? You don't want to hear about everything that goes on in private. It's not something you want to talk about. It's not something people really need to hear about. And there is a side of that with magic, but the general rules I think are really important. Just the general concepts, and to bring out these things so that people can avoid the mistakes and avoid the errors, and to actually do something constructive with themselves instead of getting dragged along into demon worship and all the horrible things that come along with that, like organ failure. Happened to a lot of people I've known who practice that art in particular. Yeah.
I just feel like there's a lot of people that they hear bits and pieces of it, but they don't ever know the real risks that are involved with it. And that's why I kind of asked, like, when you're talking with angels, how are you sure? How is someone to know if they're really talking to an angel? So that's why I kind of wanted to ask that, because you never know. Like when you're communicating, people say they hear from God, they talk with God. People say a lot of things. How do they really know that's not something evil communicating with them to manipulate them?
The grander rule that I would say for that is this is to use that gift of the Holy Spirit of discernment. And it's like that sounds nice, but you have to look at the kind of the brass tacks side of it too. If somebody has a happy, functional life, if somebody's life just seems to be in order, there are people who, for example, just they may not make the absolute smartest decisions or have the most conventional lifestyle and all things said and told, but they have what they need. They seem like happy, well-adjusted people, then if your life is going that way, where your life is getting better and you're moving towards a goal of things being good, and you can see appreciable steps towards that, then you're doing the right thing. You're working with the angels, you're working with the good spirits. If your life is going straight to hell in a handbasket, then you should be able to figure out that you're probably getting screwed over by something. Something is either lying to you, or else there's some other issue going on there. Either you're being lied to, or you're engaging in negative spiritual practices, bringing in evil forces into your life.
I know there's topics where people unwillingly invite these things in. Like I said, we can do a follow-up sometime, because I know there's a lot of questions and stuff that I get from listeners too, because I don't ask a whole lot of questions, and I always get people like, why didn't you say something? I was like, well, it's not what I don't interrupt people. So I'm trying to do things a little differently here, starting over. I took a little bit of a break, so 6 weeks to
Nice.
re-energize and ready to go again.
Yeah.
But
Gotta do that sometimes.
yeah, I want to start asking a little bit more questions here and there, but let's get back into what you're wanting to discuss, and then if we have time, I can ask some more questions.
I think now would probably be the best time to do the question aspect of things.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I've said my piece, just generally speaking. Yeah,
Okay.
if you got questions, let's go for it.
Okay. So when you're trying to communicate with like angels or whatever, what would be the best way for someone like myself to do? Is that something you would recommend someone that's just kind of wanting to do it? How would you go about doing it?
Well, first, before getting into any of that stuff, I'd recommend reading about the process and how to do it. You could either go through the old grimoires. One of the best of them is just those 3 books of occult philosophy. The 3rd book has all sorts of amazing advice there. I just happen to have written 2 books that deal with, one book particularly with ceremonial magic on the whole, just the practice, the protocols for the practice of it, from novice to adept, ascension through magic. And I wrote another book actually that specifically has to do with angelic invocation for beginners, and even has a whole ritual written out for people who want to do that and want to get in contact with these forces, called Talking with Angels. I'll send you a link actually after we finish up here. But
Okay, yeah, I'll include all that in the show notes for anyone listening. That actually brings me up to one of the other questions I was having. When you mention occult and you mention magic and everything else, the people that I know that are more religious type people, that automatically sends up red flags to them. So when someone says that they're a believer in Christ and everything else, but you practice magic, or if you are into the occult type stuff or things that were esoteric or anything like that, they're automatically labeling those types of people as evil. How do you deal with someone like that? Like, do you have any backlash from religious people from the things you dabble into?
For the most part, I don't necessarily. Not so much in that regard. There are people have given me a hard time for like using tarot cards, which the thing that kills me about that is that the tarot cards are all built on biblical symbolism, and that's a whole other subject that I could go on about for a good chunk of time too. The thing is that most people just don't really know anything about their own religion. And I just accept this, it's just most people really don't know. They think magic means that you're going and cavorting with demons and calling up Satan to like hang out for tea or something, which is like not what I do. And if you really get into the history of Western esotericism, it was something that was practiced by theologians. It was practiced by priests who were in good standing with the church. It's not like it was this like evil dark thing. There were people who did practice the dark evil magic of invoking demons and doing all that sort of stuff. But angelic communication is something that most of the saints have done at one point or another, whether the angels just showed up to him and said, "Hey, how's it going, Saint Cyprian?" or something else like that. I talked about this in the presentation I did on the Holy Guardian Angel. It's like there are all these saints, Saint Francis of Assisi, who had angels show up to him and talk to him, and man, like he would levitate during mass and all sorts of other interesting things like that. The people who look at these things as being evil just because they're not explicitly in the Bible or part of their materialist perspective on life, it's not that way. There are things, again, it comes down to discernment. You could either do things and do them in an evil way and do evil things, or you could do good things with it. If you focus, my way of looking at it is, if your focus is on God and trying to become a better person, to try to help yourself and help the world around you, to act from that, that principle of love thy neighbor as thyself, right? If you're going about it with an attitude of love for neighbor and love for God, and you're trying to become a better version of yourself and to become a better person, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think you have to do magic to have these effects either. They're technically, like prayer, concentrated, focused prayer for a particular material end, which would be familiar to the Catholics among your listeners, like praying novenas to the Blessed Virgin for success, or praying to Our Lady of Perpetual Help for assistance in grave matters and all that sort of stuff. It's like that itself is a form of magic. As one of my friends, you might be friends on Facebook. He's a traditional Catholic bishop who's also an esotericist. He refers to magic as applied theology. You're using the gifts God gave you, that God gave us as being made in His image, to accomplish things in the world in a way that is part of the system. It's all just part of the system at the end of the day. And so long as it's not being used actively for evil ends, or to either as an act of rebellion against God, and in the sense as the personal understanding of God, and in the sense of going against the great, how do I want to put it, like this, the source of all things, that is essentially the principle that guides and moves everything that lives, in whom we live and move and have our being, He pervades everything, and He is made manifest as all forms of consciousness and all of that. As long as we're not trying to go against that and to cause harm to ourselves and to those around us, which really just requires some common sense, I think we can all figure out what it means to actively harm somebody else, or ourselves for that matter. As long as we have love and the assistance of life as our purpose in all of this, it becomes very simple to know what is good and what is bad when it comes to spiritual practice, whether you want to refer to it as a cult or esoteric or whatever, or anything else. It becomes obvious. If it's driven by genuine love, then it'll end up being good. And that's what I tell people who ask me about these things. I mean, really, frankly, I don't deal with too many people who are on that side of like the hard evangelical Protestant Christian thing, where they just don't understand these things at all, because they reject the very models that the practice I have is based on. But most people I've interacted with will understand. If you explain it to them right, they will eventually come to understand it, and to see that it's not the evil thing. It's, at the end of the day, most of it is just advanced prayer, is how I'd put it, except for the parts where you're directly interacting with spiritual entities. That's kind of the part where it gets a bit more interesting. But the saints did it, so who am I to criticize?
Yeah. So I was raised in a religious family. Like, I was brought up in a Pentecostal church, which,
oh, wow.
that in itself is interesting when they talk in tongues and everything else too. That's very
Yeah,
strange to me.
like the healing stuff too, right? They put the
Yeah.
hands and
Yeah.
yeah.
So there's a lot of different aspects to that that can be turned into similar thing. Like though they have the anointed hands to heal people, or they're speaking in God's language, which is almost sounds like gibberish. Um, there's so many different aspects to that that make you wonder, like, how can they be against so many different things? Yeah, they do different things. That's why I said about the 40,000 different like aspects to Christianity. Like, there's just so many different little pieces that people interpret everything differently and have their own version and their own church and their own denomination. And each one has their own, like, strange aspect to it. So I just feel like when you go with magic, I had someone recently on here that said they were a practitioner of magic, and I got people sending emails and comments about people practicing black arts, they're evil. And this was like that he never mentioned anything like that. Like he mentioned certain things here and there, but like that's not what he's doing. He's not like interacting and trying to curse people or bring demons. You know what I mean? Like it's just they only hear what they want to hear.
Interesting.
So
Well, I hope I don't bring you too many negative comments and flack or anything.
no, like it should be fine. I got one actually I got a couple from something recently, but the ones recently was actually saying I need to get more, I need to be pushing more Christian views out there and more this and that. Like, I don't push views on any aspect. Like, that's not what my show's about. I'm here to let people discuss what they want to discuss. I don't have an agenda. So I'm not out here trying to push one way or the other.
Yeah, for sure.
But
Yeah, well, we need more shows like this. I think it's a good thing you're doing where it's just kind of like discussion, get to hear about different things rather than, having an angle you're trying to force or anything.
yeah, like I said, it's free flowing conversation for the me. Like people come on here and they have a topic they want to discuss, and I'm all for it. So. But yeah,
Nice.
you said you've written a couple books. Whatever you have for that, you can send me links to, and I'll make sure to include everything in the show notes. But I know
Cool.
we're running short on time tonight, but if there's anything else you'd like to discuss real quick, or at least let the audience know where they can, you'd like for them to reach out to you or get in touch with you about something.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I wish I had more time tonight, but there was just, yeah, scheduling things that ended up getting in the way of family obligations and stuff. So if you would like to find me on YouTube, where I have videos I've been putting up for the past several months now, you can look me up as Bartimaeus Black. I've got a sun cross as my logo there. I put up videos every Wednesday morning. I've put out a few books. I have one out on traditional Western ceremonial magic, particularly from this Christian Gnostic perspective, but I try to really leave it open for other people to understand it through their own theological lens, rather than pushing my exact theological views on them. It's just kind of an explanation of the protocols associated with this form of magic, for spirit invocation and how to make the tools, and well, not how to make the tools so much as the symbolism of the tools, so that it all makes sense as to how it all works together to make a unified system for doing this work. As well as Talking with Angels, an introductory guide to angelic theurgy, which is written more for people who are just interested in the concept. It's written a lot for people who are more into the alt spirituality, new agey type stuff. Still with the theological background that I approach it from, but there's a whole sample ritual written out in there and a lot of detail given regarding the purification processes and everything that actually goes into constructing a successful ritual for communicating with these divine forces. And I also put out a book on the tarot, Tarot Decoded Divination for All, where I go through the symbolism of the tarot cards, mostly the major arcana, and explain how to use them in divination and give some practical pointers. I've been reading cards for a good chunk of time now. I also do it professionally, but that's a whole other thing. So yeah, that's what I've got. I'm on Facebook too. If you want to look me up on Facebook, Bartimaeus Black, feel free to shoot me a message and we can chat. And yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Again, yeah, just send me links to your books and everything, and I will include those for anyone listening that's interested. They can check it out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, not a
All
problem.
right. It's a pleasure to meet you and to be on your show tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Been a pleasure. And we'll make sure to do a follow up when you get another chance. I'm kind of booked out for a little bit, but there's definitely a lot of things I'd like to discuss. So,
Yeah, sure. Just shoot me an email and let me know. Let me know when you're free next, and we'll work it out.
yep, sounds good. Well, thank you for the time tonight. And I want to say thanks for everyone out there listening. So, good night, everyone. And that's the show, everyone. I really hope you guys enjoyed the conversations. If you would like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, remember to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com or go to the contact section of tinfoiltales.com. Just get your message to me. We'll get something scheduled for a future episode. And just remember, the truth lies in the stories we share, the connections we make. Stay curious, stay open-minded. Thank you all for joining us on this journey. And until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep exploring the unknown. Good night, everyone.
Tinfoil Tales in the headphones. Yeah, it's time to rock. Got a story about a cryptic creature. Let's take a walk. Bigfoot, dogman, they're out there in the dark. But the truth is out there like an alien spark. UFO sightings got the whole world shook. Conspiracies unfold like a story in a book. Media control, trying to keep us blind. But oh, before gonna use my own mind. In mystery, they don't want us to know the secrets they hide, the truth they won't show. Dominate our society, they keep us in chains. But I'm standing tall, it's time to break the reins. Control, trying to keep us blind. But I won't be fooled, gonna use my own mind. In history, they don't want us to know